Yesterday we have discussed regarding the exploratory research. Today we are going to discuss the topic descriptive research. Descriptive research is desirable when we wish to project the study findings to a larger population. See, if you have a very large number of population, you want to represent that particular population, you have to find out a sample, then you have to do the descriptive research. A descriptive study is undertaken when a researcher wants to know the characteristics of a certain group, such as age, their sex, education level, income, and occupation. For example, yesterday I have quoted the same example. If I have actually, if I want to study the income and expenditure of a particular group, that means I am actually interested in their descriptive study of that particular study. Let me share one more thing for you with you. That is not fair. Sorry, I just want to share my questionnaire with you in which I have actually studied a descriptive analysis. In this particular analysis, you actually see the percentage, the frequencies of the persons, how many respondents came under in which group, even in which age group, how many respondents are educated. You actually study this particular thing in the descriptive analysis. So, descriptive analysis involves when you study educational level, their religion, income expenditure group. This is actually descriptive statistics. In this, basically, you actually applied percentages and frequencies. You applied percentages and frequencies to come to know about the descriptive. Even that you can apply chi-square technique in this particular descriptive statistics. When you actually want to see a rigid results of your analysis that must be related with their educational level, age group level, their income structure, their expenditure incurring point of view, then you actually have to see descriptive analysis. So descriptive research is more rigid. I have chosen it is very rigid. It is not flexible in its nature. As we compare it with exploratory research is very much rigid and very much flexible in nature. But descriptive research is very rigid in nature. It is actually there to describe the uses of product, determine the proportion of population that uses the product, or predict future demand for the product. If you want to study who are the users of the product, how much proportion of the population is using your product, or if you want to see the future demand of a product, you actually go for the descriptive statistics. Descriptive research should define questions, people who are surveyed, and the methods of analysis prior to beginning data collection. In other words, you must know about the who is going to be your respondent, what are your objectives, where do you want to study it, when do you want to do it, and why do you want to do it. So you must be specify about your research problem where I am again repeating it. You have to clear about five W's and one H, that is who do you want to study, what do you want to study, where do you want to study, when do you want to study, why do you want to study, and how will you do the research. These should be prepared first if you want to incorporate descriptive research in your research problem. Such preparations allows one the opportunity to make any required changes before the costly process of data collection has begun. This process is very costly because you have to go number of different places. Data collection is actually very costly. So you have to see first all these questions must be answered before starting the data collection technique, data collection procedure. The next is examples of descriptive research in marketing research are as follows. Number first is if we are going to follow descriptive research, you should know about the size of a market, buying power of the consumers, availability of distributors, and consumer profiles. So, descriptive research basically in marketing research study size of the market, buying power of the consumers, availability of the distributors, and consumers profile. Market share studies determine the proportion of the total sales received by a company and its competitors. Sales analysis, which includes geographic region, product line, type of account, size of account. Product usage studies describing consumption patterns. See, all these involve that type of examples which are actually going to be answered in a particular way. Hanji, this proportion is using your products. This proportion is using geographical. This geographical region is using your product. It should be answered in percentages or in number. Distribution studies determining traffic flow patterns, the number and the location of distributors. Pricing study describe the range and frequency of price changes and portable consumer response to proposed price changes. If you want to study your price changing technique, then you have to see the range and the frequency of the price change of your product, and you have to see your potential customer, how did they react about these price changes. All these are examples of descriptive statistics. The most common group of research study under the category of descriptive design in marketing are those who study and rely on structured interviews with large number of respondents. So we can say if we have to go through with the large number of population, we have large number of samples that is more than 1,000 or 2,000. That means you actually require descriptive statistics. The question used here as a research tool is characterized by prevalence of a close-ended question, that is such items that offer the respondent only a set of predetermined defined categories to choose an answer. You have to prepare a questionnaire who have close-ended question. You can't ask open question. That is like you have to ask, please rate the product on the following basis. This close-ended question is basically refer to any questions which a researcher asks their participants, from which you have to choose some options. Uh, for example, if you want to ask your preference of your product as comparative to competitive product, you have to ask close-ended question instead of open-ended question. You have to provide him few options so that a participant can fill that particular option. The purpose of predefined replay category is to standardize answers and thus make possible application of statistic in analysis. The questionnaire-based research comes in many shape and size with distinctive advantages and weaker points. See, when you actually frame a questionnaire, you have to conduct a pilot survey. Pilot survey is basically there to explain where do your questionnaire has some weaknesses, where the questionnaire is actually a good point, has some advantages. You have to do pilot survey. Pilot, if you are going to choose 1,000 number of samples to do your research, then you have to actually consider 1/10 of the that sample size to conduct your pilot survey. Some examples of specific subcategories may include cross-sectional survey that examine one sample of respondent only once, and longitudinal studies which utilize the same sample for multiple individual studies offer to examine how certain phenomena involved in a time. There are two types of descriptive statistics. The one is cross-sectional, the other is longitudinal studies. In cross-sectional, you study only respondent at one time. And in longitudinal study, you study your same respondent at different period of times. Types of descriptive research. The first one is cross-sectional study. The other one is longitudinal study. Cross-sectional study measures unit from the sample of the population at one point in time. I want to observe my consumers about at the introduction of my product. I have actually launched my product. I want to introduce them with my product. So I will give them my sample size, my sample of my product. After observing the sample, I want to ask my consumer regarding the features of my product. So I want to study cross-sectional study. That must be at one point of a time. The questions must be asked by respondent only one. Sample surveys are cross-sectional studies whose samples are drawn in such a way so that they can be representative of a specific population. India is very large in population, so we have to study sample survey. But the selection of sample survey should be like that. It should represent the whole population. A cross-sectional study involves looking at data from a population at one specific point in a time. The participants in this type of study are selected based on particular variable of interest. Cross-sectional studies are often used in development psychology, but this method is also used in the area of social sciences and education also. Features of cross-sectional study. The study takes place at single point in time. It does not involve manipulating variables. You can't change your variables again and again in there. It allows the researcher to look at numerous characteristics at once like age, income, and gender. It's often used to look at prevailing characteristic in a given population. You can check the education qualification of a respondent. You can check the income expenditure pattern of a respondent. You can actually see whether that particular respondent belong to a joint family or a nuclear family, whether the respondent living in a big house or a kacha house or a pakka house. You can actually see more characteristics if you are going to use cross-sectional study. It can provide information about what is happening in the current population. Types of cross-sectional studies. Cross-sectional studies are of two types. Number one is in single cross-sectional design, and the other one is multiple cross-sectional design. In single cross-sectional design, only one sample of participant is drawn from different population. From a target population, you only draw one sample to conduct your survey, but in multiple cross-sectional design, you have target population, but you withdraw your sample more than once from that. In multiple cross-sectional design, there are two or more samples. See, I want to study the Amritsar district of Punjab to conduct my survey. So if I ask only, I want to survey my students. If I ask only from the Amritsar group of colleges, that is single cross-sectional design. If I go for more colleges, like Khalsa College, DAB College, Amritsar group of colleges, I have now three colleges. So I'm using multiple cross-sectional design technique. Target population मेरा that is department, full department. If I'm using single cross-sectional study, that means my MBA class is the only target. If I'm using multiple cross-sectional study, that means BBA, BComs, and MBAs. All these are the part of my study. So the difference main is this: when I acquire only one class to ask certain question regarding opening of the college from the target population, that is department, I am actually conducting single cross-sectional study. If I'm asking from BBA as well as BCom and MBAs also, then I am conducting multiple cross-sectional study. Next. Next is longitudinal study. As cross-sectional actually explains at one point of time, longitudinal studies explains you are asking your same respondent at different point of time. You query your respondent in the year 1991, then you go again, you ask your respondent in the year 1995, again you go, you ask certain question from that respondent in 2000. That means you are actually following longitudinal study. Longitudinal study rapidly measure the same sample unit of a population over the time. You ask with the same number of population your questions, but you have different certain time periods, you have different time intervals. A more appropriate to more expensive and research intensive design is a longitudinal study. It is more costly as comparative to cross-sectional, and it is also based on research intensive design, resource intensive design. In longitudinal design, a fixed sample or samples of population is actually measured rapidly. A longitudinal study is a research conducted over an extended period of time. It is mostly used in medical research and other areas like psychology or physiology. For example, let me tell you example. A person is sick and a doctor want to observe his patient regularly. So all the time he will run tests on different days or alternate days or daily basis. That means he is actually doing longitudinal study. Many medical students are longitudinal researchers, note and collect data from the same subjects over what can be of many years. For example, imagine that group of research is interested in studying how exercise during middle age might impact cognitive health as people age. The researcher wants to see whether people who belong to 40s and 50s will likely to experience cognitive declines at 70, 50. Let's take an example. You have actually conducted a study the people belong to age group of 40 and 50. You actually target population X from whom you ask certain question, how healthy are they in the age group of 40 and 50, and after 20 years you again ask them again the same population, how about the health issue 1780. When you compare these two, these actually belong to longitudinal study of the research. The researchers recruit a group of participants who are in their mid 40s to early 50s. They collect data related to how physically fit the participants are, how often they work out, how will they do an cognitive performance test. Periodically over the course of the study, the researcher collects the same of the data from the participant to track activity level and their mental performance. It is again saying the same thing. You collect the data from your respondent when they are at age group of 40 to 50. After that, in their age of 70, 80, to again collect your data to ask to compare the changes of these particular age group. Difference between cross-sectional and longitudinal studies. A cross-sectional studies are quick to conduct as comparative to longitudinal study. You have to only conduct this once. The longitudinal study takes a longer times from year to even a few decades. Still, I have actually quoted you an example regarding that. The researcher who want to study 40 to 50 age group data and then 50 to 70 age group data. That means he has to study 20 years. He has to wait 20 years for to conduct that particular study. So it is very lengthy. It takes longer time. It is extended for the long time. The longitudinal study. That is why it is called longitudinal studies. A cross-sectional study is conducted over a specified period of time. You only specify it a period of time, and the longitudinal study is basically a different time intervals. A cross-sectional studies cannot offer cause and effect relationship, but in longitudinal study you can actually see the cause and effect relationship. With cross-sectional studies, different variables can be observed at single moment, but in longitudinal study only one variable be observed. In cross-section, actually you observe number of different variables, but in longitudinal study, only one variable is observed because you have to study that variable again and again. For example, if a doctor wants to study a patient, he has only one patient to study it again and again. If it's a cancer patient, how it is going, how they are going to do, it's his performance, Cross-sectional studies are more accessible for companies and research. Longitudinal studies tend to be more expensive. Cross-sectional, again, both are the techniques of quantitative research method. There are two differences we want to compare and contrast. In the cross-sectional study, researchers collect the variables are particular in time. In longitudinal study, the multiple session actually go through. The researcher has to go for the multiple sessions, and the variable could change. A longitudinal design differ from a cross-sectional design in that sample remains over the same over the period of time. In other words, same people are studied over time. In contrast to typical cross-sectional design, which gives a snapshot of a variables of interest at a single point in a time, a longitudinal study provides a series of pictures. It is actually stated that if you follow longitudinal study, you are making a whole picture, and if you are following a cross-sectional, it is only a snapshot of a picture. See, this diagram explains what cross-sectional study. You are asking different groups at the same time, whether it is group 1, group 2, group 3, and in longitudinal study, the group is same. The causal study is basically related with when you want to study the cause and effect of a particular problem. Where do you want to study how one set of variable is actually affects the other set of variables? Like if there will be more price to your product, how the sales volume will be, does sales volume decline or not? If price is less, will it impact demand more? So if you want to see the cause and effect relationship between the variables, among the variables, you actually follow causal study. It implies that to examine causal relations, researchers should have to manipulate independent variables, that is causes, and measure the resulting changes in dependent variables. For example, for example, sale of a product is dependent upon price, consumer preference, plus his ability to pay, plus need. See, it means if you want to study the cause of increase in sale of a product, so you have to see whether the price is low, what is the consumer choice, is he able to pay, or is he have any need to pay that particular product. So it is basically causal and effect relationship. It is cause and effect relationship. When you have number of set variables to study it, different number of set variables to study, you actually follow causal relationship. Such conditions are afforded by experiments which can be conducted in market conditions as field experiments or market tests. Causal research, also known as explanatory research, which is conducted in order to identify the extent and the nature of cause and effect relationship. Causal research can be conducted in order to assess impact of specific changes on the existing norms, various processes, etc. Let me quote an example. Like if you actually drink the whiskey, then it is very hard for one to drive. If you want to see drink and drive situation, that means you want to study number of factors regarding this. So it is causal relationship. A causal studies focus on an analysis of situation or a specific problem to explain the patterns of relationship between variables. Experiments are the most popular primary data collection method in studies with causal research design. The presence of cause and effect relationship can be confirmed only if specific causal evidence exists. We have studied in this economics. If price will be go down, demand will be more. If price will be go up, demand will be less. That means it is what? It is a causal relationship. Causal research is the most sophisticated research market a researcher conducted. It goes to establish causal relationship, cause and effect between two or more variables. With causal research, market researcher conduct experiments, test market in control settings. Researchers study how a dependent or respondent variable, brand sales or brand preferences affected the changes in variety of predictor or independent variable. I have already quoted an example in front of you. Like you want to see the sale of a product is, yeah, your sale of the product is increasing or decreasing. You have to check the retail price. You have to see the consumer preference. You have to see the ability of consumer to pay. You have to see whether he need that product or not, or you want to study the brand sale or brand preference, then your independent variables will be retail price, advertising spending, advertisement copy, or other promotional activities. That means if X happen, then Y will occur. To support a causal relationship, the researcher must find more than just a correlation or an association among two or more variables. To support the inference, a conclusion that if one or more occur, another will follow. Let me explain dependent and variable. I have used this term dependent and independent variable in causal research. Dependent variables are, you cannot control a dependent variable. You cannot actually control this variable. This is quantitative in nature. Generally, these variables are in relation to independent variables and why results can be predicted only. Independent variables are those which can be controlled, which can be manipulated. These are the variables which determine the presumed cause and effect of dependent variables. Causal research is undertaken to see if there is cause and effect relationship. In order to determine causality, it is important to hold the variable that is assumed to cause the change in other variables constant and then measure the changes in other variables. See, for this purpose, you have to see. Let me take an example for you. I want to study. I am actually framing a hypothesis here. I want to study uh, more sales volume. This is my dependent variable. More sales volume, that is X. X is always your dependent variable. That is X, and dependent variables are advertising campaigns, good effective advertising campaigns, plus low prices, plus good quality, plus distribution is easy, distribution policy. Why these Amazons and other e-commerce sites actually earning more because they offer their they offer their customer number of discounts. They have very low prices as comparative to market. They have good quality. The distribution policy is very good. So if I want to study, this is my expected, and all these are my Y factor. So we have to see whether this impacted X in that sense or not. You want to study all these factors impacted X volume, X more sales volume or not. You want to study this. A researcher hypothesis productive statement that relates an independent variable to dependent variable. In simple words, it is a formal statement that presents the expected relationship between an independent and dependent variable. See, one more example has been stated by me here. Increased faculty efficiency will improve student result. So what is my dependent variable here is student is my dependent variable, student result, and my independent variables increased faculty efficiency.